Hi, I'm Blake Gray, and I am here with Dr. Andy Waterhouse. He is the director of the Robert Mondavi Institute of Wine and Food Science at UC Davis. He has a PhD in chemistry from UC Berkeley. His own research is into wine chemistry, and it focuses on phenolic compounds, which are very important for how wine tastes. Dr. Waterhouse also studies the effects of oxidation on wine chemistry. But today we're here to talk more generally about UC Davis. UC Davis is easily the most important institution for wine in the United States and arguably the world. And like every other aspect of public life in California, it is completely different from what it was 6 weeks ago. So that's why I asked Dr. Waterhouse here to talk with me this morning about what's going on at UC Davis. So tell me, what is going on at UC Davis?
Well, the good news is we're still in business. So we're still a functional entity. In other words, students are being taught, classes are underway. There are no live classes on campus. Every class, and there's hundreds of classes across the campus, are all occurring virtually. So we are using Zoom in a fantastic expansion overnight. So literally, this started to unravel, the whole situation started to unravel at the end of last quarter. So end of winter quarter, the last week was optional whether or not you held live classes. The next week was exam week. There were no in-person exams. All the exams had to be handled electronically, virtually, or canceled, or whatever. I gave my students my exam using Zoom. So they set up their laptop at home in front of them so I could watch them take the exam while they filled out the paper form that I had emailed to them a few minutes earlier. They then took their camera or their phone, photographed their exam, and emailed it to me. That's what I graded, the images of their papers. And then we had a week break when most professors, like myself, were preparing for something totally different and learning to use Zoom in a new way. This quarter, I'm teaching a guest lecture series, so I don't have to prepare any notes, but I've had to learn how to use Zoom, how to manage it, how to take roll using Zoom. Attendance for this class is important, so I have to get a record of who appeared and how long they were there. You can do that, it turns out. And the other professors are doing all sorts of things. So Andy Walker teaches 101C, the viticulture field course. Well, Andy's out there with a teaching assistant who's got his phone focused on Andy. And Andy's talking about how to prune these vines, how to train them. And he's, so it's all happening without any requirement that you be on campus.
Can students who are watching Andy Walker do something like that, do they have vines that they can also prune, or it's just all having to watch it?
Well, they don't have to be on campus, so they can be anywhere. If they have access to vines, clearly they could do this. But some of the students are in the Southern Hemisphere. It's harvest down there, or was harvest. I can't remember now. Let's see. Harvest is, well, I think it's wrapping up, right? In the Southern
I think so.
So some of the students in the classes are literally in Australia. So anyway, it's a different world. Yeah.
That's right. At UC Davis, you attract people who want to learn winemaking from all around the world. And now I guess some of the students couldn't even come to the campus if they wanted to.
Well, many of them are in Davis because they've paid rent on apartments, and the graduate students are here. I mean, they could, I suppose. Some of them have gone to their parents' homes, but many don't want to do that. So they are in Davis, but they don't come to campus. They stay in their apartment. Hopefully that's what they're doing.
And what about research? Because I know UC Davis always has a lot of research going on at any given time? And how is this pandemic affecting that?
Well, it depends on the project. Some projects have to continue. So if you have grapevines that are out in the field and things need to happen to those vines or else the experiment fails, then you have to send people into the vineyard. Of course, you can only send one person at a time. So things may not happen very quickly. But if you have a field experiment, it's considered essential to continue that. And you can, so we have people working in the vineyard using distancing and all that stuff. They have to stay so many feet apart. But we do have people working in the vineyards. And so, for instance, we need the grapes for fall harvest, like everyone does. So you have to be working in the vineyard. I know, vineyard workers are out there. They have to be, or else we'll lose the crop. On the other hand, we have laboratory experiments. Those are also continuing in certain cases. So I have one student who's got a project where he started an experiment that's continuing. So he started an experiment a month ago, and he needs to continue to take samples, right? So it's an experiment that's ongoing. So he goes in maybe once a week, takes a sample, analyzes it, and then goes back home. And another student has a project that, again, needs to be done by certain dates. So he's going in also occasionally. They can't go in together. So that means we can't do dangerous work. So in other words, if there's something hazardous going on, you have to have two people. So we could arrange it. We haven't had to do that, but we'd have to arrange to have one person stand on the other side of the room or sit there in case something hazardous happened, like something caught fire or whatever. We would need to have a second person in the room. Luckily, the operations we're doing are really not hazardous. So again, we can continue to work at a reduced rate with restrictions on how many people can be there and what they can do, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you give me an idea of some of the sorts of things that you're still researching, either in vineyards chemistry or any aspect of it while this is going on?
Well, I don't really do vineyard experiments, so I don't know the details. But if you have an experiment underway, then the plants continue to grow. You can't stop that. And if you want to have an experiment for the year, then you have to go out and manage the vines if any management is needed, right? So, basically, you have to continue to irrigate. If you have an irrigation plan and it has to be executed, I suppose no one's really irrigating yet. But once it got warmer and your vines needed water, if you don't irrigate them, you're going to damage the experiment. So those kinds of things go on. In one case, the student I mentioned, an experiment where he's watching the progress. This is actually an oxidation experiment. He's watching the progress of what's happening to this. It's a model wine sample, and the reactions are occurring very slowly. So if he wants to actually have the experiment complete, he has to go in and take samples and analyze them. So things like that are ongoing. But other experiments can be put aside, and those have happened. So another student is working on an extraction protocol. Well, that can wait. He hasn't started it, and it's going to wait until the campus feels more comfortable opening up. And I'm hopeful. I think one of the keys to opening up, as I'm sure you've heard, is testing.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to access testing through, UC Davis Hospital or a research facility. Someone will set up a testing system that we'll be able to use. I haven't heard any news about that, but I'm hopeful that we'll have access to enough testing so we can find out who's sick or who isn't, and then we can feel more comfortable going into work if we know everyone in the room has been tested and they're safe. whatever that means, right?
Now, I know that something you often do a lot of organoleptic research at UC Davis, testing
Right.
the impact of something on the way wine tastes. Are you able to do any of that right now?
That is all shut down, right? Because you're dealing with people, and you have to hand people samples, and you have to have groups of people discuss what do these samples taste like. Usually that happens around a table where everybody's tasting the same thing. And then this is a descriptive analysis protocol where you at the end result is a description of how, say, these 5 wines differ in their tastes. So what you do is you get people together and you taste all the samples and some other samples perhaps, and then you decide, okay, this sample has more of a cherry flavor than the others, this one has more of a chocolate flavor, etc. Then someone will prepare samples with added cherry or added chocolate, whatever. Then you come back and you taste, then all that group comes back and they taste the samples again, and they agree, okay, when we say cherry, this is what we mean, right? So you have to have groups of people tasting a whole bunch of wines and other samples together. And of course that can't happen. So that's Dr. Heyman's lab. And she's basically said her lab is closed until, things open up. So that's shut down.
What about the extension research work? I know that UC Davis, one of the big concerns
Yes.
of the California wine community is the stuff that
Right.
extension. Is that ongoing as well?
Well, we had a series of, we call it On the Road series. And I think we had one in March. I forget, I wasn't directly involved in that. I can't remember where it was. One of them occurred, and then there was one in later March, and that just got closed. It shut down. No, didn't happen. And subsequent events in April have been canceled. So we're now reorganizing. We're going to be doing them using the same technology with more people involved. We'll have Zoom meetings with 50 or 100 people, and that's now being planned. In the interim, Professor Block, the chair of our department, and Anita Oberholster, our extension specialist in enology, is going to be holding, I believe, weekly or bi-weekly open office hours. And they'll be discussing individual topics. So I think Dave's going to talk about a maceration trial or something that he did a few years ago. So they'll start a series of the sort of less formal extension activities and give people an opportunity to ask questions. So we're trying to adapt, and we're really hopeful that maybe we'll have to have a couple of these webcasts of extension events rather than live in person, either on campus or on the road. But maybe by summer we'll be able to do these again. I don't know. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm on the pessimist side when it turns into when it's going to be smart to reopen. As for when we actually reopen, who knows? But I'm very fearful of a second wave. But it's not that I know anything more than anybody else.
So, I think as you can see, we're able to function at a minimal level, at least with research. We're able to function with teaching at a pretty much normal level. We have had to cancel some classes, which really we couldn't do without having people there. So Professor Block, a couple of years ago, started a wine finishing exercise in the spring. What they did was they took wines made by the students in the fall, which, by the way, are not necessarily the best, and then essentially got them ready for bottling. So they did, stabilization, filtration, oak treatment with chips. They don't have enough time to use barrels because they're trying to do everything in 10 weeks. And they would have an alum winemaker come and advise them. The class would be divided into 2 teams, and each team would have to come up with a concept to, a label and a vision, and then try to take some of the student wines from the fall and turn them into that vision. That can be challenging. And that basically got scratched because there was just no way that they could do that without actually, doing the physical processing, right?
Mm.
So that's unfortunate. Students really have come to like that class because it's a lot of fun. And at the end, they get to present their wine to a department tasting. I was sort of hoping in the future we'd actually have public tastings of those wines, and maybe we will in the future. But for now, that whole exercise had to be canceled because there just wasn't any way we could do this without the students actually being there, because they need to be able to taste the wine and make decisions, and any of that just couldn't happen. But the other classes are going on.
I guess for some students, some of these things must be required for graduation. I guess some students, this is going to push off when they can graduate, right?
Well, we've tried to make sure that everything required for graduation is going to be available. So the wine tasting class is going on. Okay, so this is and you think, okay, that's not possible, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reality is we had to do something. And so Professor Heyman decided that, a lot of the class involved statistical analysis of sensory data. And so they have data from prior years, and what they're doing is they're basically providing the students with data sets of student tastings from prior years. And the class exercise is analyzing that data to establish, is sample A different from sample B, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a large part of so the tools you need to have, the skills you need to have to analyze sensory data is a large part of the exercise. So they're able to do that, and that's what they're going to get out of the class. They're not going to get to taste any of those wines. But what else could we do? And we can't ship them the wines. We can't, maybe at the end they could send them some samples. I don't know. I've looked into trying to do virtual tastings as part of the Robert Mondavi Institute. And really just shipping people wine samples is very complicated because of all the regulations around shipping alcohol. It's really complicated. So anyway, that's not going to happen in class. And it's a shortfall, but everyone in the world knows that spring of 2020, something happened. Life wasn't normal. So that's the reality. But they'll be able to graduate.
Well, that's good. I'm curious about what's the campus like right now? Are you going to your office every day? Are there a bunch of people around?
It's very quiet. I can go to my office because the Robert Mondavi Institute office is separate. There's a separate entrance, and basically no one else is there. So I go in on Tuesdays to manage this class because I want to have two computers to be able to manage this guest lecturers thing. So I use one computer to monitor attendance, on the other computer to monitor the lecture. So I can do that in my office. But there's nobody else there. There's nobody else really in the building except for an occasional student here or there running one of these essential experiments. So there's nobody, and none of the staff are there. The winemaker is there occasionally. Again, you can't just abandon the facility. So she comes in to check on things and to do a few operations that have to be done. But otherwise, it's if you walk across campus, normally on a spring day, you'll encounter hundreds, if not thousands of people. Especially if you go between classes, it's a throng of people everywhere, right? The other day, walked across campus and saw 4 other people.
Wow.
Yeah, and nobody's chatting. It's just people trying to get from A to B. It's like, I suppose any town, it's just very quiet. You go downtown here, There's no parking problems. There's no traffic problems.
That's amazing to me because I've always enjoyed being in downtown Davis because it is so, it's a small town, but it's so vibrant, small
It's
college.
lively, yes. Yeah, I mean, you go to a restaurant I go there to get, well, as everyone, you get takeout, right? So the people who are at the restaurant are only there for 5 minutes. You're not there for 2 hours. So you just walk up, you get your bag, thanks, thank you, go home. Well, that's the way it is, right?
Yeah, the social isolation. I mean, we're all in a very long-term experiment about what social isolation is going to do for human beings.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not good.
Right.
Hopefully we'll get through this.
Something I'm wondering about, have there been things that you've discovered in having to do them differently for classes or anything else where you think, this is good. We can do this even when we can get back to normal. We could keep doing it this way because it's better.
Well, I think there's going to be continued use of this technology, because I mean, for some things it works fine. It is strange giving a lecture if you can't see anybody's faces, right? Well, normally when you talk to somebody, you get a reaction. You can see them nod, or maybe they're falling asleep, but anyway, there's somebody there, right? And at the very end of last quarter, I did a review session using Zoom, and all the students had their video off, which is, it turns out that's normal. There's various technical reasons to turn the video off. But it was weird. It was like talking in an empty room to nobody. There's no reaction. You don't get any auditory reaction. You don't get any physical reaction. It's draining. And other professors have mentioned this as well. If you have to give a lecture with zero reaction, it's really strange. So I don't think that's going to continue. It might be, but the lectures are recorded, so you could potentially use them again, and then use class time for questions and answers. And that we're sort of learning about that. In other words, you record your lectures, the students watch them, and then you spend class time having the students ask questions or work on problems. So we're learning that this can be an effective way to teach. Again, doing the lectures is challenging.
I think the student in that sense is almost getting twice as much time, because if you've got an hour lecture and they can watch it on their own time before they come to class, they've got that extra hour to grasp the subject more.
Right. And that it's called flipping the classroom. That people have been trying this out for some years, and it has its own problems. So we're still learning about, making this effective. Some students find it really difficult to just sit and watch an hour lecture. It's kind of dry. And again, because you don't have the cues going back and forth, you don't have that interaction with the professor. So you're just watching something, it's sort of sterile. So some students find it difficult to listen to an hour lecture. And that's another thing where if this continues, if I'm teaching a proper lecture in the fall, we'll probably take the 50-minute lecture and divide it up into smaller segments. And so we'll discuss a topic, and then that'll end, and you move on to the next topic, and it'll be smaller, shorter bites, as it were, right? And then use class time again for interactive discussion. I think that has a lot of benefit to the students. Again, you have to learn how to manage the discussion to make sure everybody gets involved, and that there's some tricks to doing that properly. I have learned So right now I'm teaching this guest lecture series. So it's mostly winemakers who talk about their careers, their experience in industry, and essentially they're giving the students advice on what kind of jobs they should be looking for and things like that. And it's the students love it because they're getting, information about their future careers from their peers. And the lecture part is fine because the visiting lecturer, is basically just like I am talking to the group. But then the discussion part is we're sort of learning how to manage that. Basically everybody has their microphone off, and then they recognize somebody and turn on their microphone, and then they can speak and ask a question. And what the students have found, and in order to, because attendance is part of the deal here, I want to see the students are there. So I have all the students' videos on, right? So I can see like a screen full of video feeds from all these students. Well, the other students also see each other. And one of the students commented, he said, "I love this class because I can see my classmates. In the other classes, we turn off all the video. So we don't know who, you just have little black boxes, right? With people's names, but you don't see them. Whereas in this class, they get to see their classmates." And this week, actually, this evening, I'm going to have an organized discussion of small groups after the lecture. We'll see how that goes. Again, we're learning. I was hoping to have a less formal process where, so in this, the way this class normally happens is we have a guest lecturer, usually a winemaker, but it can be people from other aspects of the industry, come and lecture to the students about, careers, history, things like that. And then at the end of it, there's a barbecue, and the students ask questions in the lecture hall, and then they all go outside and get to chat with the visitor, right? In small groups, they come up, as you'd expect in any sort of reception scenario where you have a guest lecturer. People come up, ask questions, small groups ask questions, they leave, other people come up. And I was hoping to replicate that, but the technology doesn't really accommodate that. You can't have, I would say, informal groups form and break apart. There's no capacity for that, at least using Zoom or any of the other tools that I'm aware of. I could assign people into small groups and then have the guest lecturer go to one of those groups, chat with them, move to the next group. But it just doesn't, we talked about trying that with the first lecture, and she thought it was crazy. It wasn't going to work. So, and I agree, it's kind of stilted and anyway. So the idea of having an informal reception where people can associate, talk to each other, and then break apart and into other groups, that doesn't exist yet. Maybe someone will create it, who knows.
I mean, it's one of the many aspects of just being social with human beings that we're missing out on, because I bet for a lot of students that time with the barbecue, that time at the barbecue with the winemaker might be one of the things they would most remember from the class, or maybe even their whole college experience, I can imagine.
Right. Many students say this was their favorite class because they got a chance to interact with experienced people from the industry, and of course they get the chance to interact with each other. They're having dinner together, so they really enjoy it. And that's unfortunately that is not happening. But there's nothing we can do about that part.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious about yourself. Nobody gets into wine as deeply as you have without liking wine. What are you drinking these days? What's bringing you the most pleasure?
Well, I like to support our recent graduates. Many of them are trying to start businesses, and this is a tough time to get going. So I've been ordering wine from alumni to keep the table filled with wine. So one of my graduates is recent graduates from a couple of years ago. Corinne Rich started a small place with her partner Katie called Bird Horse. So I've been buying that wine. And another one, you probably haven't heard of Bird Horse, but you probably heard of Martha Stuman. Her wines are out there. We've been buying some of that. And another more distant graduate, Faith Armstrong, has a label called Onward. So we've been buying a little bit of that. Trying to spread the wealth around, trying to buy wines from a number of alumni to support their efforts. It's interesting to see the market. You know, if you had a business based on tasting room sales and restaurant sales, you're really hurting. But people who had, you know, good online sales are probably going to survive, I guess. I don't know what you've heard about this.
Yeah, the online sales are, you know, are way up. Overall, I'm still trying to get a good sense of the picture, but it seems like even with the collapse of restaurant sales and tasting room sales, overall wine sales are up. And moreover, I just learned yesterday that, you know, we all predicted in 2008, the amount per bottle that people spent was going down, but it doesn't seem to be happening. People still seem to be spending at least the same amount of money they were spending on a bottle of wine, at least right now. I mean, we'll see, because the recession that's going to come from this is just starting. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm buying wine from UC Davis grads all the time because they're everywhere. but but yeah, it does seem like there are going to be a lot of people a lot of wineries that are going to be deeply affected, and some of them won't make it. But wine as a whole, as an industry, is going to get through this, it appears.
Yeah, my son actually runs a small restaurant in Washington, D.C. It's a beer garden, actually. And they've had to basically close except for takeout. So that keeps the kitchen operating. And he's the manager, and he's trying to keep the kitchen staff employed because, you know, they need to work, right? And the wait staff are all, you know, they're all laid off. But on the side, since he's not that busy, he's actually delivering wine for a friend who runs a wine shop, and their business is thriving. So the wine delivery business is booming. I mean, the shop is going to make it probably because they've been able to do this. They apparently don't make quite as much money as they used to, but they'll survive. But people are buying the wine. So, you know, hopefully that will keep us rolling, keep the wine business moving. And when we get out of this, it'll be a different world, but we'll still have wine, which is important.
And having wine is important. Dr. Waterhouse, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really interesting. And, you know, one of these days, I hope to come to one of these barbecues in person.
We'd love to have you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.